There exists an alchemy so sophisticated, so perfectly calibrated through divine algorithm, that almost every soul falls into its cipher without recognition. This is no crude snare visible to the naked eye, but rather an intricate web woven from the very fabric of success itself. You believe you are achieving zenith in this alcove of existence, ascending through the ranks of achievement like an admiral commanding his fleet, while actually forfeiting the very essence that defines your eternal worth. You feel triumphant, basking in the elixir of worldly accomplishment, while simultaneously becoming spiritually bankrupt. Your soul's treasury, emptied coin by precious coin, Al-Ghazali, that admiral of intellect, that sovereign of scholarship who navigated the vast oceans of knowledge, called this phenomenon devotion to the temporal realm. He recognized it as the most cunning of all spiritual maladies. This was no casual observation from an ivory tower academic, but the desperate testimony of a man who had tasted both the nectar of worldly success and the bitter dregs of spiritual emptiness that followed. In his extensive folios, each page bearing the weight of hard-won wisdom, he authored over 200 pages explaining exactly how this snare operates with the precision of a master craftsman. He revealed why even the most virtuous souls, those who appear to be spiritual admirals commanding fleets of good deeds, cannot escape this trap through their own algebra of effort. They require celestial guidance, divine intervention, the very breath of the Almighty to break free from chains, forged from gold and recognition. Al-Ghazali spoke not from the sterile calculations of mere theoretical algebra. His words carried the authority of lived experience, the credibility of one who had climbed to the summit only to discover the terrible price of the ascent. He was the supreme academic of his golden era, occupying the most coveted chair at Baghdad's most prestigious madrasa, that fountain of learning where the greatest minds gathered like precious gemstones in a merchant's collection. His stipend exceeded that of princes. His influence reached across continents like the tentacles of a vast network. Myriad disciples hung upon his every utterance as though his words were themselves an elixir capable of transforming base ignorance into golden wisdom. Students traveled from distant lands, crossing deserts and mountains, simply to sit in his presence and absorb the overflow of his vast intellectual treasury. By every caliber that matters in this terrestrial sphere, wealth, recognition, influence, respect, academic achievement, he had not merely reached the summit, but had established his throne upon its peak. His name was whispered in the courts of caliphs, his opinions sought by merchants and soldiers alike. He possessed that rarest of combinations, profound knowledge wedded to practical authority, theoretical mastery married to real-world influence. Yet beneath this gleaming surface of success, something far more sinister was taking place. Like hidden alcohol slowly corroding the interior of a pristine vessel, spiritual decay was eating away at his very core. The more his worldly stature increased, the more his soul withered. The louder the applause of men became, the fainter grew the voice of the divine within his heart. He discovered to his horror that his magnificent worldly achievements were actually constructing a barrier between himself and his creator, each success adding another stone to a wall that was slowly but inexorably separating him from the source of all true life. This realization struck him not gradually, but with the force of lightning illuminating a dark landscape. He saw clearly, perhaps for the first time, that he had been climbing the wrong mountain entirely. All his efforts, all his achievements, all his carefully cultivated success had been leading him not toward the divine presence he sought, but away from it. He had become a master of the external world while becoming a stranger to his own soul. In that moment of terrible clarity, Al-Ghazali realized his worldly achievements were not merely failing to bring him closer to the Almighty. They were actively severing his connection with the divine like a sharp blade, cutting through the most delicate silk. Each promotion had been a step away from paradise, each accolade a veil drawn across his spiritual vision, each moment of worldly triumph a nail in the coffin of his soul's vitality. This epiphany struck him with the force of divine lightning, illuminating the vast chasm between what he had been pursuing and what his soul truly craved. In that blazing moment of recognition, he understood that he had been drinking poison while believing it to be the elixir of life. The very achievements that the world celebrated were the chains that bound him to spiritual mediocrity. This revelation, more powerful than any earthly discovery, more valuable than all the treasures in the caliph's vault, led him to compose one of the most devastating and surgically precise critiques of temporal attachment ever inscribed by human hand. Like a master surgeon wielding his scalpel, he would dissect the anatomy of worldly delusion with unflinching precision. In volume 26 of his monumental masterwork, Ihya Ulum al-Din, the revival of the religious sciences, that towering cathedral of Islamic thought, containing 40 volumes of distilled wisdom, Al-Ghazali dedicates an entire tome to what he terms the censure of this world. This is no casual, philosophical meditation, but rather a comprehensive autopsy of the human condition, performed by one who had himself been infected by the very disease he now sought to cure. The title itself carries the weight of a judge's verdict. Dam al-Dunya, the censure of the world. He approaches his subject not as a detached academic, but as a physician diagnosing a plague that had nearly claimed his own life. Every word is chosen with the precision of an archer selecting his arrows. Every argument forged in the furnace of personal experience. He commences this devastating analysis with an alarm that will shake the very foundations of your existence. Like an earthquake rupturing the earth beneath your feet, his opening declaration cuts through centuries of human delusion with the sharpness of Damascus steel. This world is not merely imperfect or temporary, it is actively treacherous, deliberately perfidious, and systematically deceptive in its very essence. This is perhaps the most crucial insight in all of spiritual literature. The world is not a neutral testing ground where good and evil compete on equal terms. Rather, it is designed with the cunning of the most sophisticated trap to appear beneficial while being harmful, to seem like salvation while delivering damnation, to promise the elixir of ultimate fulfillment while administering the slow poison of spiritual death. Al-Ghazali reveals that this cosmos operates like the most skilled confidence artist, employing an elaborate algorithm of deception that has been perfected over millennia. It studies your deepest desires with the attention of a scholar reading ancient manuscripts, then crafts illusions so perfectly tailored to your specific vulnerabilities that resistance becomes nearly impossible. The world promises you the ultimate elixir, that magical formula that will transform your life from base metal into pure gold. It whispers of success that will finally satisfy, relationships that will finally fulfill, achievements that will finally validate your existence. Yet like a master alchemist working in reverse, it delivers naught but spiritual destruction, through its sophisticated alchemy of deception. The most insidious aspect of this cosmic fraud is that it delivers just enough temporary satisfaction to keep you invested in the scheme. Like a skilled gambler who allows the mark to win small amounts while setting them up for catastrophic loss, the world provides enough fleeting pleasures and momentary triumphs to maintain the illusion that ultimate satisfaction lies just beyond the next achievement. This is why Al-Ghazali's warning carries such urgent gravity. He is not speaking as a pessimist who has given up on life, but as a former admiral of worldly success who has seen behind the curtain and discovered the terrible truth. The more passionately you love this world, the more systematically it betrays you. And the most dangerous aspect of this betrayal is that it feels like success right up until the moment of final reckoning. But what exactly does this Admiral of Wisdom mean when he speaks of devotion to this world? Here lies perhaps the most crucial distinction in all of spiritual literature. For Al-Ghazali is not launching an assault against the natural appreciation of divine beauty, nor condemning the simple joy of savoring nourishing sustenance, nor denouncing the sacred bonds of cherishing kinfolk. These are themselves gifts from the Almighty, reflections of divine attributes meant to be received with gratitude. Instead, he addresses something far more subtle and infinitely more hazardous, a spiritual malady so sophisticated in its manifestation that even the most devout souls can fall victim without recognizing their condition. He speaks of making this transient realm your ultimate algorithm of existence, your final destination in the grand equation of life, your primary source of identity, and the fundamental caliber by which you measure your worth as a human being. This distinction is as precise as a master jeweler separating genuine gemstones from clever imitations. It is the difference between using worldly blessings as instruments in a divine symphony versus making them the entire composition. It is the difference between appreciating the beauty of a garden while remembering the gardener versus becoming so obsessed with individual flowers that you forget the eternal source from which all beauty springs. Al-Ghazali reveals that love of this world manifests not in crude materialism, which even a child can recognize as spiritually dangerous, but in the subtle elevation of temporary things to the status of ultimate concerns. It occurs when your heart begins to treat this brief sojourn on earth as though it were your permanent residence. When you start investing your deepest emotions in outcomes that will crumble to dust within decades. The most insidious aspect of this spiritual condition is that it masquerades as virtue. The person afflicted with love of this world often appears to be the most successful, the most dedicated, the most admirable member of society. They work longer hours, achieve greater recognition, accumulate more impressive credentials. From the external perspective, they seem to be winning at the game of life with remarkable skill and determination. Yet, Al-Ghazali, with the precision of a master physician diagnosing a hidden ailment, provides a simple yet devastating calibration to measure whether you have fallen into this sophisticated trap. His diagnostic algorithm cuts through all self-deception with surgical accuracy. Ask yourself with complete honesty, what generates your greatest felicity? When your heart soars with joy, what has typically triggered that elevation of spirit? What events make you feel most alive, most validated, most successful? Conversely, what precipitates your deepest melancholy? What disappointments send you spiraling into despair? What failures make you question your fundamental worth as a human being? Most revealing of all, What occupies your contemplation most frequently during those quiet moments when external distractions fade away? What scenarios play endlessly in the private theater of your mind? What dreams and fears keep you awake when you should be surrendered to peaceful rest? If the honest answers to these penetrating questions involve anything that shall not exist in a century, if your deepest joys and sorrows are tied to possessions that will decay, achievements that will be forgotten, relationships that will end in separation, or recognition that will fade like morning mist, then you have fallen into the snare, regardless of how religiously observant you may appear to others, or even to yourself. This diagnostic test is so precise because it bypasses the sophisticated rationalizations of the intellect and goes directly to the true condition of the heart. You may intellectually affirm that this world is temporary. You may regularly remind yourself that only the eternal matters. You may even teach others about the importance of spiritual priorities. Yet if your emotional reactions consistently reveal a heart that has made temporal things its ultimate concern, then you are living in a state of practical atheism regardless of your theoretical beliefs. Al-Ghazali understood that the heart, like a compass needle, always points toward what it considers most important. If your heart's needle consistently points toward things that will turn to dust, then you have unwittingly made dust your deity. You have fallen into the most sophisticated trap ever devised, one that allows you to maintain the appearance of spiritual awareness while living in complete contradiction to spiritual reality, the initial method by which this cosmos destroys your essence operates through what Al-Ghazali calls the alchemy of deceptive assurances, a sophisticated algorithm of false hope that has been refined over millennia to exploit the deepest vulnerabilities of the human soul. This is not crude deception that any alert mind could detect, but rather a masterpiece of psychological manipulation so subtle and so perfectly calibrated to human nature that even the most intelligent souls become willing participants in their own spiritual destruction. This terrestrial realm whispers to you ceaselessly, like a skilled merchant in the bazaar who has studied your desires with the precision of a scholar examining ancient manuscripts. It speaks in the language of your deepest longings, crafting promises so perfectly tailored to your individual weaknesses that resistance becomes nearly impossible. The world's algorithm of temptation operates like the most sophisticated cipher, encoding messages that bypass your rational defenses and speak directly to your heart's most vulnerable chambers. The fundamental promise upon which all worldly deception rests is elegantly simple, yet devastatingly effective. Achieve this elevation in status, and you will finally discover ultimate joy dancing in your heart like flames in a sacred brazier. The world points to some glittering prize, a promotion, a prestigious position, social recognition, professional achievement, and whispers with absolute conviction that this particular success will be different from all previous disappointments. Find perfect companionship. The world continues its seductive litany, and you will attain complete fulfillment. That elixir of emotional satisfaction that will transform your inner emptiness into overflowing abundance. It paints pictures of ideal relationships where all emotional needs are met, where understanding flows like honey, where love provides the ultimate answer to life's deepest questions. Accumulate sufficient treasure in your vault, the world promises with the confidence of a master alchemist, and you will achieve absolute security. that fortress of financial protection that will shield you from every possible anxiety about the future. It shows you visions of wealth so vast that worry becomes impossible, resources so abundant that every conceivable need can be satisfied with the ease of drawing water from an overflowing well. Gain enough recognition and acclaim, the world concludes its symphony of deception, and you will finally feel valuable, worthy, significant. Your name will be inscribed in the annals of importance. Your achievements will echo through time like the call of the muezzin across a sleeping city. Each promise carries the weight of apparent logic and the appeal of seeming reasonableness. After all, don't successful people appear happier? Don't loving relationships provide genuine joy? Doesn't financial security offer real peace of mind? Doesn't recognition satisfy the human need for significance? The world's arguments are so compelling because they contain enough truth to make the lies believable. But Al-Ghazali, speaking with the authority of one who has tasted every cup the world offers, reveals the cruel and devastating reality hidden behind these glittering facades. This world never, not once in the entire history of human experience, delivers on its fundamental promises. It operates like a merchant who displays the finest goods in his window, but delivers inferior substitutes when payment has been made. Every achievement, no matter how significant, leads not to satisfaction, but to new and more demanding cravings. The promotion brings greater responsibilities and new sources of stress. The relationship reveals new problems and previously hidden incompatibilities. The wealth generates new anxieties about loss, new complexities in management, new pressures from those who want what you have gained. You believe you're climbing a magnificent ladder toward the palace of happiness, each rung bringing you closer to ultimate fulfillment. But Al-Ghazali reveals the terrible truth. You are actually walking on an elaborate treadmill disguised as a stairway to paradise. You expend enormous energy, make tremendous sacrifices that cost you your peace and often your principles, endure incredible stress that ages your body and hardens your heart, only to discover that despite all this effort, you remain exactly where you started emotionally and spiritually, just more exhausted, more cynical, and more desperate than before. The most sophisticated aspect of this cosmic deception is its perfect timing. Just when you begin to suspect that your current achievements are not delivering the promised satisfaction, the world immediately redirects your attention to the next prize. Ah, it whispers knowingly, you haven't found fulfillment because you haven't achieved enough yet. The real satisfaction lies just beyond your current level. Work harder, climb higher, accumulate more, and so the cycle continues, each disappointment becoming not a lesson about the futility of worldly pursuit, but rather evidence that you simply need to pursue more worldly things with greater intensity. The trap tightens with each revolution, until you realize, often too late, that this world was lying to you with the skill of the most accomplished deceiver, promising gardens of paradise while leading you deeper into the desert of spiritual desolation. The second method by which this realm destroys your soul occurs through what Al-Ghazali calls spiritual blindness, a gradual eclipse of divine vision that happens so subtly you never notice the darkness descending until you are completely lost in shadows. When your heart becomes attached to temporal things, you gradually forfeit the ability to perceive spiritual reality with the same tragic inevitability as someone staring directly into the sun loses their physical sight. You begin measuring everything by worldly calibrations, success by accumulated treasure, beauty by physical appearance, human worth by social status and recognition. Al-Ghazali explains that spiritual vision and worldly sight operate in opposite directions, like two rivers flowing toward different seas. The more focused you become on worldly success, the less capable you become of discerning spiritual truth. The more you chase temporal pleasures with the intensity of a merchant pursuing profit in the bazaar, the less you can taste eternal joy. You become spiritually colorblind, unable to perceive the divine illumination that bathes everything in sacred light. The world's alchemy transforms your inner eye from an instrument capable of witnessing divine beauty into a crude calculator that can only measure material advantage. Like someone staring intently at their device while a magnificent sunset unfolds above them, you miss the very reality that could nourish your soul while obsessing over shadows that provide no true sustenance. The third method by which this cosmos destroys your essence operates through what Al-Ghazali calls spiritual starvation, a devastating famine of the soul that occurs even amid apparent abundance of worldly success. Your soul possesses needs as real and urgent as your physical form. It requires connection with the divine, like a plant requires sunlight. Purpose beyond the material, like a compass, requires magnetic north. Hope in something eternal, like a desert traveler, requires the promise of an oasis. These are not luxuries or philosophical abstractions, but fundamental necessities without which the soul begins to wither like a garden deprived of water. Yet when you become obsessed with worldly pursuits, chasing achievements with the fervor of an admiral, pursuing enemy ships across vast oceans, you systematically starve your essence while lavishly feeding your ego. You pour all your energy into pursuits that cannot nourish your deepest being. Like someone attempting to satisfy hunger by consuming beautiful paintings instead of bread. Al-Ghazali employs the devastating metaphor of someone perishing from thirst while grasping at mirages in the desert. The more desperately they chase these illusions of water, running toward each shimmering deception with renewed hope, the thirstier they become, their strength ebbing with each futile pursuit. This world offers you elaborate mirages of satisfaction, each one appearing so real, so promising, so perfectly designed to quench your spiritual thirst. But every time you reach these glittering promises, you discover nothing there except empty sand and bitter disappointment. Meanwhile, the real water, the divine presence that flows like an inexhaustible fountain and could actually satisfy your soul's deepest thirsts, surrounds you constantly, yet remains unnoticed because your attention is fixed entirely on the false promises dancing in the distance. The fourth method by which this cosmos destroys your soul manifests through what Al-Ghazali calls spiritual competition, a devastating transformation that turns your heart into a battlefield where you wage constant warfare against shadows and phantoms. When you cherish this world above the eternal, you inevitably begin the futile algebra of comparison, measuring your worth through calculations that place you in endless competition with others. You judge your value based on accumulated treasure compared to their vaults. Your achievements weighed against their accomplishments. Your recognition measured against their fame like a merchant, constantly checking his scales against his rivals in the bazaar. This breeds a poison more deadly than any physical toxin. You begin to feel threatened by their success as though it diminishes your own light, and secretly pleased by their failures as though their misfortune somehow adds to your worth. Your heart becomes consumed with the terrible trio of envy, jealousy, and resentment, transforming what should be a sanctuary of peace into a fortress under constant siege. Al-Ghazali reveals the profound absurdity of this spiritual competition through his devastating analogy. You are like prisoners in a cell, fighting viciously over who gets to sit closest to the barred window, while remaining completely oblivious to the fact that the cell door stands unlocked and they could walk into complete freedom at any moment. The things you battle for with such desperate intensity in this temporal realm will prove utterly meaningless when you lie in your grave, yet the spiritual qualities you neglect while fighting for them will determine your eternal destiny with the finality of divine judgment. The fifth and perhaps most tragic method by which this world destroys your soul occurs through what Al-Ghazali calls spiritual amnesia, a gradual forgetting so complete that you lose all memory of your true purpose and divine origin when you become deeply attached to worldly things, investing your heart's treasures in temporal pursuits like a foolish merchant, storing precious goods in a building destined for demolition. You gradually forget the fundamental reality of your existence. You forget that you are merely a temporary visitor in this realm, not a permanent resident who should be decorating and renovating as though this were your eternal home. You forget with tragic completeness that you will be held accountable for every moment you spent here, every breath you drew, every choice you made, that this entire earthly sojourn is an examination designed by divine wisdom to reveal the true condition of your heart. Al-Ghazali captures this spiritual tragedy through his penetrating metaphor. Love of this world makes you act precisely like someone who checks into a hotel and becomes so fascinated with arranging the furniture and decorating their temporary room that they completely forget they have an eternal home awaiting their return. You spend all your precious time and irreplaceable energy making your brief accommodation more comfortable and impressive, while utterly neglecting the permanent residence that represents your true destiny. You become so absorbed in the details of the journey, counting the milestones, admiring the scenery, competing with fellow travelers, that you forget entirely the destination toward which you are supposed to be traveling. The temporary overshadows the eternal until the eternal disappears completely from your consciousness, leaving you spiritually orphaned in a world that was never meant to be your final resting place. But Al-Ghazali, that admiral of divine wisdom, does not abandon you in the depths of despair like a captain fleeing his sinking vessel. Having diagnosed the spiritual malady with surgical precision, he now provides the antidotes, practical solutions, forged in the crucible of his own transformation from worldly success to spiritual liberation. The first solution he prescribes is what he calls mindful remembrance of mortality, not the morbid obsession of one consumed by death's shadow, but the liberating awareness of reality that cuts through every illusion like a master's blade through silk. Every worldly attachment that now torments your heart with anxiety becomes utterly insignificant when viewed from the vantage point of your deathbed. Every worldly success that currently inflates your ego becomes meaningless when you consider that the angel of death could summon you tonight before dawn breaks across the horizon. This remembrance does not cast life into darkness, but rather illuminates it with freedom's brilliant light. Freedom from the crushing anxiety of protecting treasures you cannot ultimately keep. Freedom from the relentless stress of achieving things that do not survive the grave's finality. The second solution Al-Ghazali provides is cultivating spiritual perspective, training your inner eye to see everything from the divine viewpoint rather than through the distorted lens of worldly calculation. Like an admiral who navigates by celestial stars rather than shifting coastal landmarks, you learn to ask the questions that matter. How will this decision affect my relationship with the Almighty? How will this pursuit influence my spiritual growth, like water nourishing a garden? How will this attachment impact my preparation for the eternal realm that awaits beyond death's doorway? When you consistently apply this spiritual algorithm to every choice, worldly temptations lose much of their hypnotic power over your heart. Like mirages that dissolve when approached with clear vision, the third solution is practicing spiritual detachment, not the passive withdrawal of one who has given up on life, but the active engagement of a master horseman who uses his mount without being enslaved by it. You learn to use worldly resources as instruments in service of your divine purpose, to enjoy worldly pleasures without becoming addicted to them, like a merchant sampling spices without gorging himself sick, to pursue worldly goals without making them your ultimate destination. Al-Ghazali's metaphor of the skilled horseman illuminates this perfectly. The rider uses his horse to reach his intended destination, but he does not become so attached to the animal that he forgets entirely where he is traveling. The horse is a means, not an end. Similarly, you can employ worldly resources, wealth, relationships, achievements, recognition, as vehicles for fulfilling your divine purpose. But you must not become so enamored with these temporal tools that you lose sight of your eternal destination. The fourth and final solution Al-Ghazali provides is investing in spiritual wealth, redirecting your precious energy from accumulating treasures that death will steal to cultivating riches that will accompany you into the next realm like faithful companions on an eternal journey. Acts of sincere worship, knowledge of divine names and attributes, service to others, performed for Allah's sake alone, purification of character until it reflects divine qualities, remembrance of the Almighty that flows through your consciousness like a river of light. These spiritual treasures cannot be stolen by thieves, do not depreciate with time's passage, and will be waiting to greet you when everything else has crumbled to dust. Al-Ghazali reveals that souls who truly grasp this principle experience a profound alchemy of priorities. They do not cease working or achieving, but their motivation transforms completely. Their worldly success becomes a means to spiritual ends rather than an end pursuing itself. Their accumulated wealth becomes a tool for serving the divine rather than a monument to personal ego. Their relationships become opportunities for mutual spiritual elevation rather than sources of validation for their wounded pride. But the most profound insight Al-Ghazali offers penetrates to the very heart of human longing. He teaches that the persistent emptiness you feel despite worldly success, that hollow ache that remains no matter how much you achieve, is not evidence that you need more worldly acquisitions. Rather, it is your soul's desperate signal that you are attempting to fill a divine void with temporal objects, like someone trying to quench desert thirst with handfuls of sand. Your soul contains what can only be described as an Allah-shaped vacuum, a sacred emptiness designed by divine wisdom to be filled by nothing except the Creator Himself. Every worldly pleasure you pour into this vacuum, wealth, fame, relationships, achievements, simply drains away like water through a broken vessel, leaving you emptier and more desperate than before. But when you redirect your deepest love from the temporal to the eternal, something miraculous occurs that transforms your entire existence. You do not lose your capacity for joy. You discover joy's true source. You do not become indifferent to beauty. You perceive beauty's divine origin. You do not cease caring about people. You learn to love them with the pure love that seeks their ultimate good rather than your own gratification. Al-Ghazali concludes his monumental teaching with a reminder that pierces like an arrow to the heart's center. This world is neither your enemy to be feared nor your friend to be trusted. It is your examination, designed by divine wisdom to test the true allegiance of your soul. Every worldly blessing is a question about your gratitude. Every trial an inquiry into your patience. Every temptation a measurement of your spiritual strength. The choice that determines your eternal destiny is elegantly simple yet infinitely consequential. What are you choosing to love with the full passion of your heart? And what is that love accomplishing to your soul? Is it drawing you closer to your Creator or building walls between you and divine mercy? The world you may love with such desperate intensity will abandon you in the cold silence of your grave. But the God you may have neglected while chasing worldly phantoms will be with you forever. Your eternal companion in whatever realm awaits beyond death's threshold.